Hello, 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 and welcome to Every Movie Ever. I'm Eric, and today, as you can plainly see, we are in merry old England to talk about movies from Britain. And I am going to do an obnoxious British accent the entire time. It will vary in quality and style throughout. As you can see, I am now in more of a high-pitched type of accent than even when I started the program. But let's get started with one of my personal favourite British movies. Incidentally, am I drifting into Australian? Probably. But let's keep going anyway with Shaun of the Dead. This is a terrific movie. It stars Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, a couple of right old blokes if I ever heard of them. What? And was directed by Edgar Wright. This is one of 3 movies they made together and what they have since called the Cornetto Trilogy. This is the first one of those. This is an action comedy about zombies that manages to both be one of the best comedies and one of the best zombie movies out there at the same time. I highly recommend it. Lots of great funny business, lots of terrific, it is very Australian now. I'm going to give Shaun of the Dead 4 stars. Well, next movie is a movie I like to call Hot Fuzz. That's because that's the title of it, you see, is Hot Fuzz. There's an H in there, but you can't hear it because I'm trying to do a really bad British accent. Well, I'm dropping a lot of consonants. Hot Fuzz, again, Simon Pegg, Nick Frost, directed again by Edgar Wright. This time it's a comedy movie, but it is also a policeman movie, a buddy cop movie, if you will. I particularly like this one. This is probably my favorite of the Cornetto trilogy. I like it a lot. Simon Pegg is a sort of tough as nails super cop, and Nick Frost is a not as good cop. They get into all kinds of fun action things in a very small town in England, so it's a nice juxtaposition of big action in this very small rural community. I love this movie, it's one of my all-time favorites, and I'm going to give it 4.5 stars. Wrapping up the Cornetto trilogy, we have The World's End. Same group of blokes back together again, lots of fun supporting characters. Rosamund Pike is in this one and is probably the best female character in the whole trilogy, so that's a nice add-on. You also have Martin Freeman in this one, and he's a right old bloke that I like to see in a movie every now and again. We'll be talking about him later on in this very episode. But let's talk about The World's End. This one features a bunch of high school mates coming back together to go on a pub crawl in their hometown, only to find out that their hometown has been overrun by alien robots. Fun movie that really uses its interesting premise. This time we're combining a sci-fi conspiracy type movie with a comedy movie, and in this particular case they are using the whole thing to, sort of say something interesting and important about nostalgia and how you can never really go home again. I'm going to give it 4 stars. Now, we can hardly talk about British movies without talking about the premier British comedy team, Monty Python's Flying Circus. And their very first movie was a movie called And Now for Something Completely Different, which featured big screen adaptations of some of their more popular sketches. I think this movie is very fun. It's a lot of fun to see these sketches done with a lot of a budget and up on the big screen. I like it a lot. It's, for me, a lot of the sketches, particularly the wink, wink, nudge, nudge sketch, when I think about it in this version, in the movie. I've gone entirely Australian now, so we're just going to finish this out as an Aussie as I give this 4 big stars. Hello. I wonder if you're as sick of this already as I am. I'm having an hard time keeping this up and a difficult time concentrating on the accent and also doing the reviews. But let's talk about what is undeniably the premier Monty Python movie, and that has got to be Monty Python and the Holy Grail. This is the one where they're King Arthur and whatnot, and it's very silly. There's a lot of really quotable lines. You got the knights who say knee. You've got the killer rabbit. You've got all the fun stuff that we used to run around high school quoting at each other all day long. This is a great movie. If somehow you've gotten this far in your life and haven't seen it, you should. 5 big stars. Python's next big screen effort was The Life of Brian. Now this is a controversial film, to be sure. This is the one where they tell the story of Brian, a man who lives around Jerusalem at the beginning of the modern age at the same time as Jesus, and gets confused for Jesus. I'm not going to get into it too much because I know this is a controversial movie. I will only say that for me, it doesn't work as well as The Holy Grail or Now for Something Completely Different. It's a fun movie with some fun pieces in it. I think that the episodic and sketch-like nature of the movie works a little bit against the plot in this one, but there's some fun stuff. The song at the end is tremendous. I am going to give it 3.5 stars. I'm going to try a little bit more of a posh type British accent, a little bit more of a kind of Bobby, if you will, ma'am voice, and see if I can maintain this a little better. Now, Python's last movie was Monty Python's The Meaning of Life. Now, this one has no plot through at all. This is just a bunch of sketches about life and death and birth and whatnot. It has the famous Mr. Creosote sketch about a very big gentleman who eats a lot of food until he explodes. Again, this movie, because of its sketch-like nature, is a little hit and miss. Some of it is very funny, some of it fails to land. Overall, I have to give it 3.5 stars. Getting more or less away from the Pythons for a minute, let's talk about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the movie based on the book, based on the radio play by Douglas Adams, one of Britain's funniest writers. Now, this is a movie that when I went to, I was very excited to go see in the theater and was honestly a little disappointed by it. I've never listened to the radio show. I have read the book. It is a great book, certainly one of my favorites. But the movie doesn't quite fire on all cylinders. It has a great cast. You've got Martin Freeman as Arthur Dent, the main bloke, who is the only survivor of the planet Earth, who goes on a journey across space with a bunch of space weirdos, including Mos Def as Ford Prefect, and Sam Rockwell as Zaphod Beeblebrox, one of the great characters in all of literature. It doesn't quite work as well as you would like, but again, it has some nice moments, so I'm going to give it 3 stars. One of the more recent British movies that I saw is Suffragette. This is the story of the suffrage movement in England at the turn of the century. It stars Carey Mulligan, who's one of my favourite British actresses. She's a tremendous talent, and it tells her story of how she lives in, you know, not the greatest home life in the world, and how she gets involved with other women in her community to fight for the right to vote in England. Meryl Streep is also in this movie, and while she is billed as being a big part of it, her role is kind of blink and you miss it. This is mostly Mulligan's movie with a great supporting turn by Helena Bonham Carter. I liked this movie a lot. I'm trying to remember how many stars I think I should give it, but I'm having trouble thinking of that right now. I'll give it 3.5 stars. Now, the big British movie of the summer, and I don't know who this guy is, but he's showing up, I guess, so that's who we're going to stick with for as long as I can. The big British movie of the summer was Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Maybe you could find them in Piccadilly Circus, or in this surprisingly low-res version of Piccadilly Circus I found myself in today, although I quite doubt it. Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. This is a movie that stars Eddie Redmayne, who is one of our great screen talents, playing a little bit beneath himself to do a Harry Potter spin-off movie. It's kind of fun. Part of what I like about this is they get away from all the Hogwarts school stuff, which after like 7 or 8 movies, I'm done with a little bit. And I'm happy to see them go to 1920s or 30s New York and pal around there for a while with Dan Fogler, who's one of my favorite supporting actors and who would play me in a movie, I think. Great supporting cast in this. I don't know the name of the lady what plays Queenie, who's the sister of the main love interest, but she's a lot of fun. The beasts are kind of fun. The plot doesn't make a lot of sense. It's a little overlong, and the end is a little dumb. I wish they had spent more time, honestly, with the beasts, but I liked it. Actually, I gave it 3 stars. One of the finest pieces of British comedy to come down the pike is Alan Partridge. Now, if you're not familiar with Mr. Partridge, this is a character created by the great British comedian Steve Coogan. He is a full of himself television and radio presenter who always gets himself into trouble and beyond his depth. There's been TV shows and radio shows, and they finally did a movie version recently called Alan Partridge Alpha Papa. At least that's what it was called here in the States. I think it might have just been called Alan Partridge in England, but I don't really know. In any event, in this one, Alan Partridge gets taken hostage and ends up finding his legs somewhat as being a good presenter during a hostage crisis during which he is the actual hostage. Your enjoyment of this is going to depend largely on how much you enjoy Alan Partridge. I enjoy him quite a bit, but that said, the movie's a little bit thin, so I gave it 3 stars. I was really looking forward to seeing Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. It's an adaptation of a John le Carré spy novel, which are usually quite a bit of fun. This one stars a whole ooze-oo of British male talent, because heaven forbid we get a lady in this thing. But you've got Colin Firth, you've got Gary Oldman's the main guy, you got Toby Jones in it, you've got all kinds of fellas, you got John Hurt in it. And honestly, this one left me a little cold. Benedict Cumberbatch is in it. He plays Sherlock on the TV. This one left me a little cold. I wanted to like it a lot more than I did, but it's a little pretentious and it is confusing to follow at times. I can only give it, I don't even know what voice this is anymore, 2.5 stars. Well, Christmas time is fast approaching as we tape this, being as how it's the end of September and Christmas comes earlier every year. So it's time we started thinking about one of the great Christmas movies, and that's Love Actually. This accent is garbage. Love Actually, this is the one, it follows a whole bunch of different storylines around the Christmas season. I've lost the thread of this accent entirely. Give me 1 second here. It follows them all around the Christmas season. This guy's back again. And, there's all sorts of different characters. Alan Rickman is in it. Hugh Grant is the Prime Minister, and he has a lovely little love story going on when the American president comes to visit, and the Prime Minister kind of starts falling for one of his secretaries. That's a nice part. Liam Neeson's is in it. He has a nice part where his wife has recently died and he's raising a son by himself, but is maybe open to love again as he notices his son also starting to find romance in the grade schools. Alan Rickman's a real jerk to his wife. There's all sorts of great plots in this. It's a really fun movie. Probably the best is Colin Firth is a writer or something, and he moves out to the country and falls in love with his housekeeper, but they speak different languages, This is a terrific movie. I'm losing my voice. 4.5 stars. We're going to try a little bit more of a subtle British accent for a little while because this is very difficult. Also, none of these accents have been any good, and I'm sure this has been the most obnoxious episode of every movie ever. But let's talk about Time. This is the latest movie from the guy who directed Love Actually, and also, Notting Hill, and 4 Weddings and a Funeral. This is his latest. It's about a guy, it's not Eddie Redmayne, it's that guy who you think is Eddie Redmayne, but isn't Eddie Redmayne. I think his name's like Domhnall Gleeson. He's in the new Star Wars. Anyway, he plays a guy who can somehow, quantum leap style, travel back in time within his own body whenever he wants. So if he makes a mistake, he just travels back in time and fixes it until, he can't anymore. It's a fun movie. It's a fun movie with a nice romance in it. I kind of don't have a ton to say about it except to give it 3.5 stars. The inadvisable nature continuing these accents is becoming abundantly clear, but here we go. Let's talk about Labyrinth. Labyrinth is a movie directed, well, not directed. Well, is it direct? I can't honestly remember. But Jim Henson is heavily involved in this movie. This movie is his baby. And this is the one that stars David Bowie as the Goblin King. He steals the baby brother of Jennifer Connelly, and Jennifer Connelly goes on a mission through a crazy labyrinth filled with crazy fantasy Muppets to find the baby. It is a big cult classic. People love this movie. I have never loved it that much. I like it, I guess. I don't think it's that great. It never quite congeals to me in the way that it should, which is why I can only give it 2.5 stars. And now it's time to take a visit to the Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. This is a movie where a bunch of old people from England, so all your favorite old people actors, your Bill Nighy, your Judi Dench, I can't think of her, Maggie Smith, that's her name. They get too old, and so they move to England to the Best Exotic Marigold Hotel for their retirement. Turns out the hotel is not what they dreamed it would be. It's kind of run down, and they all band together to fix it up, learn about life, and start anew there in India. It's a very sweet movie with a great cast, 3.5 stars. The second Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, meanwhile, is not as good. Tried watching it, did not like it very much. There's some weird plots in this one. They probably should have left well enough alone. Still, it's watchable more or less. Actually, let's say 2 stars. It's very difficult to remember what star rating I'm supposed to give these movies while doing these dumb accents. Now, a while ago, we talked about Carey Mulligan. I'd like to talk about her again, this time in An Education, which is one of my very favorite movies from the past decade or so. This one is about Carey Mulligan, who is a young girl in England coming of age in the 1960s. She gets involved in an ill-advised romance and along the way learns an awful lot about herself. Amazing, amazing performance from Carey Mulligan. Alfred Molina plays her dad. He's great. Also, one of them Skarsgård guys, I think Bill, is the guy she has the relationship with. That's very well acted. He's a real skis ball. I love this movie, 4.5 stars. One of my favorite things to watch on the telly has got to be great performances on PBS. This is a show where sometimes they film like Broadway plays and things and show them on TV. In one particular feature, they went to the West End and filmed the West End production of Billy Elliot, which is a story about a kid who lives in coal country in England and he just wants to dance. Amazing songs, great dancing, wonderful production. This one really choked me up at the end, I got to tell you. These accents are ridiculous still. I like this a lot. It's a good time. You should really see it. It's a very affecting and moving piece of both theater and movie combined. 4.5 stars. It would be a crime to talk about British cinema without bringing up those wonderful cartoon creations, Wallace and Gromit. Wallace being the older gentleman and Gromit being the industrious dog. We're going to talk about their feature film, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, wherein something happens and Wallace starts turning into a rabbit at night. This is a pretty fun movie. It is not as good as some of the Wallace and Gromit shorts. It's a real tribute to the Hammer horror movies that dominated England in the 70s and starred such luminaries as Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. This is a pretty fun movie with some fun animation and some cute bunny rabbits. I have to give it 3.5 stars. Well, that's the show tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for sticking with us if you got this far. I'm sure you've been very annoyed by all of this. I've had a hard time doing it, and I probably won't be doing something quite like this again. So until next time, thanks for watching. Good night.